They don't do it all year round. I think they just do it like in the kind of in the springtime or part of the year, but they don't offer them all year round. I don't know if Green Cross offers clones or seeds or not. I'm not sure.
We don't offer seeds. We do offer clones to MMAR patients, but otherwise than that, we actually take orders from clients that are Larsen Health Canada, and so if they have a certain specific number that they're looking for, we look to facilitate with them with that. But otherwise than that, we don't deal directly with members because there's the legalities there that legally.
Let's say somebody with the federal card might get the approach guys and
like I said, we kind of, it's the legal behind. I think Kirk might actually know a little bit more about that. I don't know where it states right now, where actually it's like they said in the beginning, I think it's more of a gray area dealing with it. So it's kind of like, let's see what we can do. We're trying to facilitate and help people that are in need of amplification. So
Pretty fuzzy edges now.
it's so gray.
We haven't started selling clones yet. I'd like to do that, but we also haven't figured out exactly. Because every some kind of limit. It depends on someone 500 clones necessarily if they come in. And we have limits on how much pot you can buy too on a daily and weekly basis, and try to limit people so they can't come in and buy a pound of weed or whatever. Unless they show us they really need and have that much or whatever. We try to make a 2-week limit and a certain amount per day kind of thing, just to stop people from reselling.
And I guess, Kirk, the comment I have is that, I mean, I've been pulled over a few times. I mean, once, it depends on the RCMP officer. Sometimes they're okay, sometimes they're not. I mean, it's zigzags, a grinder, and I'm like, okay.
Yeah, it's, you know, I think it's unfortunate that 8 years into this federal program, there's a real lack of guidance being provided to patrol officers on the street. Officers are coming in the most contact with persons with authorizations to possess. I still get calls from people who have run into police officers and don't know there's a medical exemption program in Canada, and have never seen a car, that don't have any understanding of the fact that there is some legality to some people's use of marijuana possession of it. So it's a failure of training, and I think it's a failure of dialogue and understanding. And it's sort of forums like this one that I think assist in that process to educate people who then, if they run into situations with police, can hopefully educate police. I know there's at least a couple of people in the room that have had that opportunity to really take advantage of it.
I spent 15 minutes with a couple officers and asked me a million questions. I didn't know what they were doing.
Well, that's right. They're not trained, you know, and that's a policy problem. It's getting better. The RCMP, for example, now routinely call Health Canada before executing search warrants on suspected marijuana grow operations to determine whether or not there is an exemption in place at that address. Most of the municipal police forces in the Lower Mainland have similar policies, but I don't think they all do. And so you run into a problem there because you know, executing a search warrant is risky business both for officers, but also for the occupants of the home.
We'll do one more question.
Yeah, one question, and we'll go.
Yeah, I was curious how much variety is there in a dispensary, and does the dispenser get his skill, his or her skill from anecdotal, from the people coming in? How do you find out how to apply it to certain?
You mean understanding about the products that you're selling, you mean? Or like what they are?
Strain varieties.
Varieties, varieties.
I guess.
Yeah, well, I mean, you know, we're one of the few things we're telling us that you sold pot in high school is a positive recommendation on your resume, not necessarily a negative one, you know, for some of our employees. Well, it is, I mean, it's having experience with marijuana, but I mean, we try to guide people like indica and sativa and what the different strains are, and that. Is that what you're asking me? Like those
Well, I'm wondering how broad a spectrum of strains are there?
Well, I mean, it's like a rainbow. I mean, there's as many infinite varieties as you want, but there's several broad categories. But normally an indica and sativa, and then everything in between those two poles of the spectrum. But we also have hash products and butter and edible food products and tinctures. We're going to get creams and lotions for topical application. We're going to bring in some suppositories soon. So we're working on every possible way you can ingest or use cannabis products medicinally. We would hope to make them available to you.
Well, what I'm saying is, if say an individual had tried sativa a few times and indica a few times from one source, would there still be a possibility that there's something there that could help you? Does it vary?
Yes, it
It
does.
absolutely
And that's an ongoing thing, and strains is half the question, and sort of like who grew it or how it's produced is the other part of the equation. So two identical strains might look and taste differently depending, but you will find certain cannabinoid profiles that are similar. It's usually the ratio of THC and CBD and CBN and numerous other things that create those unique medicinal effects. So it varies, but we try to give people as much guidance as we can about that and help them to sort of understand what they're getting, and hopefully it will work for them before. We have like 10 kinds of pot, usually 10 different strains, but they rotate and vary quite often. So
I'd like to take now, we'll go on to Kirk. Now, Kirk, he's been really, I think, at the cutting edge of what's going on in Tousaw. We've been talking about all these gray areas, always trying to find access, trying to improve the system. This is very difficult. But I think Kirk has really been working at the front lines of all of this, and very recently, there was a court decision that came out here in DC that Kirk was very active in. So I'm going to turn it over to him to discuss with you where we're at in terms of all of these fuzzy gray areas. So, thank you.
Thanks, Randy, and thanks everybody for coming out. My name is Kirk Tousaw. I'm a criminal defense lawyer. I handle predominantly marijuana cases, almost exclusively marijuana cases, and have for some time. I thought what I might do today is talk a little bit about the history of Canada's federal exemption regime and take us up to the present as to where we are now, because I think there's a lot of misunderstandings about the federal government's program, and hopefully it's something that, I mean, if everybody knows what I'm saying, speed me along, but if not, hopefully it's pretty useful information. Prior to 2001, Canada did not have a legislative process, an exemption process in place for the medical use of marijuana. And instead what happened is under Section 56 of the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act, the Minister of Health had the ability to exempt anyone from the application of the criminal law, not just as it related to marijuana, but any drug, any controlled substance, for scientific and medical or other reasons at the sole whim of the minister. And so in the late 1990s, both as a result of some court decisions as well as just some general pressure on the minister, a few people began to be approved for these Section 56 exemptions. That process, however, was challenged in court as being frankly too arbitrary. It was solely left to the discretion of the minister. There were no guidelines to give the minister some understanding of when to exercise that discretion. And the fact of the matter was that it was just a handful of people that had managed to gain access to some legal protections. In a case called R.V. Parker in Ontario that went to the Ontario Court of Appeal, the short version is that the court said, look, this ministerial exemption process is arbitrary, it leaves too much of the discretion of the minister, it's unconstitutional under Section 7 of the Charter, which protects your life, your liberty, and your security of the person. And so the court said to the government, you basically have a choice. You can keep your prohibition on marijuana possession if you craft an exemption process that allows seriously ill people to not have the full weight of the criminal law visited upon them for possessing marijuana for medical use. Or we're going to strike down the prohibition on simple possession of marijuana, and you can't have that at all. The government got a year to craft some regulations from the court, and they came up with this regulatory process called the Marijuana Medical Access Regulations, or MMAR. The MMAR in their original form were fairly quickly challenged, both by patients and by people who wanted to produce marijuana on behalf of patients, which led to another court decision in 2003 in a case called Hitzig versus Canada. In the Hitzig case, certain portions of the medical marijuana access regulations were found to be too restrictive, arbitrary, and unsupported by any real basis in evidence or logic, and those portions were struck out. And I'll sort of get into the detail of what the various iterations of this program have been over the years. The government then embarked on a amendment process, in fact, two amendment processes, one in 2003 and one in 2005, where they made various changes to the access regulations, both on what I'll call the access end, which is allowing people access to the legal protections of the program, in other words, exempting legitimate marijuana users from the application of the criminal law, and on what I call the supply end of the program. Where do people actually get marijuana to use for medical purposes? Further court challenges ensued because the government actually, in my view, essentially ignored the HITSIG decision and went ahead and kept the program.